Of course it does. I said, okay,
Mm.
show me any scientific paper published in a scientific journal that uses the word proof. Not math, because math does prove. Not logic, because logic does prove. Science does not prove. It gives strong evidence for. There's no such thing as extraordinary evidence. There's strong evidence and weak evidence. So let's take a simple example. What is the molecule that is responsible for inheritance? At the beginning of the 20th century, everybody thought it was some kind of protein because proteins were doing everything else in the cell. Nobody thought it was nucleic acid, DNA, or RNA, because nucleic acids were too simple. They only composed of only a few components. Then in the 1940s, a guy named Oswald Avery did some experiments where he showed that some inherited characteristics are tied to the DNA, not to proteins. And people said, that's impossible. How could that be? But that was some evidence for DNA as the genetic material, but it was weak evidence because it didn't have a good explanation. He got it from chemical experiments. People thought, well, it's an artifact. There must have been a protein in there. And then in 1953, a few years later, Watson and Crick came up with the double helix, and that was proof. Well, no, it wasn't proof. That was strong evidence that the DNA is the genetic material. Why do I say it isn't proof? Because whenever you find something that you absolutely believe is true in science, you still know that further research could change it. Proof doesn't work that way. If you prove something in mathematics, it's almost impossible to change that with further work. But in science, for example, we now know when we talk about inheritance, there are things besides the DNA that are related to inheritance. There are epigenetic effects. There are other codes besides the genetic code that affect how cells work. Dennis Noble, a very famous physiologist from Britain, who's not a theist, by the way, has published a lot on this. So, even the idea that inheritance comes from DNA, it's not absolutely 100% true. So science never proves anything. That's the first part of that comment that's wrong.